One more person left. Right, okay. Welcome to this afternoon's session at EAMS. This is the second session of the conference. Welcome if this is the first one you've attended live. Let's have a look at the programme. So this afternoon we've got two talks. The first from Andre Heck and Natasha Brower about bridging between computer-aided assessment and traditional pen and paper exams, something they've been working on for a number of years. And then we've got a talk from Richard Gratwick about a course that was taught entirely online and marked using specifications grading. Before we get into those, I just want to remind you about the Moodle site for the conference. There were some good questions about Matthew's talk earlier. Over on the, let's go down here, over in the ask a question area, I've started a question: what tips would you give to someone new to maths e-assessment? I realise there are a lot of people suddenly getting into e-assessment in a hurry this year. So this is an opportunity to share some of our collected experiences and wisdom. So if you think you can pass on some good ideas there, please do. Okay, so we'll start with our first talk. First we have Andre Heck and Natasha Brower, who are going to tell us about e-assessment in some way. Okay.
Hello, everybody. I think Andre is going to start, so could you unmute Andre?
I've clicked the ask when mute button.
Yes, Andre, you can start.
Yes, I'm sorry for this. I've been looking at the presentation beforehand and not left it on the front page. Welcome to this presentation in which we will describe our efforts in combining computer-aided assessment with pen-based examination. And who are we? Well, first, Natasha Brower. She works at the Teaching and Learning Center of the Faculty of Science. She supports lecturers in their teaching and examinations and coordinates the digital assessment at our faculty. And secondly, it's me, Andre Heck. I work at the mathematics department and I'm much involved in mathematics service education, in particular in life sciences. And to set the scene for this talk, let's first watch a video about how our life changed on Friday the 13th.
How quickly university life changed. From one week to the next, these halls went from full of life to silent and empty. A couple of weeks ago, it was hard to find a space for your bike here in the morning, or a place to study here, or a spot to eat your lunch in the sun here. Across the city, the university's campuses and buildings buzzed as thousands of students, academic staff, staff from ICT, facilities and communications, receptionists, canteen workers, bike coaches, and security personnel came and went to study, to research, to work, to interact. The daily routine that suddenly proved so fragile. Now our new normal looks like this: online teaching and online exams, meetings with colleagues on Skype or Zoom, if it works. Kitchen tables have become work desks and homeschools combined. Work and private life have become intertwined. Friday afternoon drinks with colleagues or at the Student Association are now mediated by screens. By this way, we protect ourselves and others and maybe the creativity and the sense of togetherness in adversity that all of this has brought about will see us return stronger than ever when the time comes.
I guess that many of us have this kind of experiences with a lockdown of education on campus. And from one day to another, we had to switch to online teaching and learning and had to adapt our assessment methods because what we used to do in our examinations was not possible anymore. For example, going with small groups of students for an exam in a classroom, not possible anymore. Or for large groups going to a big hall or to a room dedicated and equipped for digital assessment, that's not possible for the moment and probably for quite a while. And in less than 2 weeks, lecturers in Amsterdam had to design and start implementing online teaching and had to make plans for upcoming exams in April. So that was almost also in just a few weeks. And lecturers were confronted with new stakeholders who stepped in to steer the transition to online education. And sometimes these were persons you had not heard of before, such as the Chief Information Security Officer or the Privacy Officer. But in online teaching and learning, and especially in online exams, remote exams, they play a decisive role in the policy making and are really the decision makers. Key issues for the remote exams are, of course, security and privacy, so it's not a wonder that they have much to say about this. All university-wide and faculty-wide and departmental steering committees that were installed to formulate a corona crisis policy did their work with the best intentions, but certainly put restrictions on the lecturers' freedom of choice that we were so much used to. For example, when the exams in April were coming, the decision was made that online proctoring was prohibited. This was a decision at the top level of the university, but supported also by faculty management. And the reason was we first have to look more in detail in the security, in the privacy, in the technological issues, although there was experience with proctoring, online proctoring at faculties. But for example, also the Central Student Council was against online proctoring, and they went to court actually. And last week, the verdict was that they lost their case. So next study year, we might have online proctoring in our exams. But these are choices that are made for lecturers. And for April, also the advice was don't do online invigilation. It's best to be avoided. And if you really want to use it, you can only do it in Zoom, simply because the university can support this via the university ICT services. So it is a different world also for the lecturers. And for lecturers, information was collected, practical information and good practices via the teaching and learning centers at the university. And basically that means that lecturers and support staff help other lecturers. And you can find this actually on the Keep on Teaching site, which has been installed in March. And it's publicly available, actually. So you can also have a look at it, how this information is given, what kind of information, and keep on tracing it. And with respect to examinations, because we're talking in this conference about assessment, they identified 3 important things to consider as a lecturer. Guess what? Fraud that has to be taken serious. And because online proctoring was forbidden, the main message was also that we should consider exams, online exams, by definition as open book exams where you don't know what students will use during their exams. Another advice that you can find on this Keep on Teaching site is actually to keep online exams, the technology, as simple as possible, because the more sophisticated you make it, the more you run the risk of technical problems and failures. And it also puts more stress on the teaching staff, the support staff, and the students. And this interest in taking care of the stress of students, that was another important point, because you have to realize that this sudden change of teaching towards online teaching, but also online exams, means that the students get an examination method they were not preparing for, not expecting it. And one of the advices is at least to give them a mock exam to practice what you are going to do, and to inform students well enough beforehand about how you will go on with the online examination. So that can give them some relief when they are worried about time pressure, connection problems, disturbances of online exam taking at home. So these are things to consider. And they also made a list. I will just show the list a bit, because there are more nicer things to present. But they made suggestions of alternatives to the on-campus exams, and that are the take-home exams with harder problem sets, which have not a unique correct answer. That students can work on a written exam, which is more a writing assignment, actually. You can change your oral exams into online oral exams, and they don't need to take so much time if you focus on the higher order skills. And what is more important for us, and was mentioned specifically for mathematics and statistics education, was the use of fully parameterized open questions in an online assessment system. And for tests that actually assess more factual knowledge, and where fraud was a big issue, they suggest that use draw questions from an item bank, which are manually parameterized closed questions or short answer questions. But you can have all these lists, but they also wrote the warning that, well, maybe not all these options are available or supported at your faculty. And the support is something that you really need as a novice user of online assessment tools. So that's why the Keep on Teaching site is important. Also in non-corona times, that lecturers are aware of all the options that they have for examinations. So I will go now into what we do with the mathematics exams and with science exams. And with first mathematics, because it's rather difficult to imagine that you do math not with pen and paper. And when you look at what the Bachelor of Mathematics decided to do with their examinations, then their decision was basically, let's do business as usual, but instead of invigilation in rooms where we have the exams, we will have remote invigilation via Zoom, but we will not record the students, we will just observe them as we were used to do. And then they get their normal exams, but not handed over in paper, but they get a PDF with the questions, do their work, and scan at the end their paperwork and upload it in the Canvas learning environment. And for third year examinations like take-home exams, they were just continued, and oral exams were turned into online oral exams. So it looks as if it is more business as usual, but still there is some stress involved and much discussion about how to arrange this all. And before you get the impression that the mathematicians just stick to their traditions, the main changes were actually in the teaching. that was online, and all lectures were using a graphics tablet and an iPad. And actually, for the coming study year, all first year and second year bachelor students have to buy a graphics tablet to participate actively in the tutorials and practice sessions. What I want to talk about more is about the mathematics service education, because there we have a long tradition already in using online learning environments, teaching environments, and online assessment. And we use for that purpose the environment sowieso. And I will not show or go much into detail in the environment sowieso, because we have presented it 4 years ago at the EAMS conference, and you can look at the proceedings from 2016. But just to give an idea, here you see a screenshot, a small part of the screen, where a question about integration via the method of substitution is shown as a randomized example. And bottom line, it is an exercise, actually, a question at an exam, but where students can enter their answer, they get feedback if it is formative assessment, and they get, of course, feedback, but later when it is a summative assessment. But the difference between systems like Numbas and Stack, they are more focusing on the assessment part. Sowieso also allows you to create digital course notes, which include all these questions, which can also be used as examples. So how do the mathematics exams look like when you are in this online environment and in courses in this online that use this online environment? Now, again, it looks on the surface as business as usual, but since we have no online proctoring, we decided that we would randomize our questions more than we used to do. Normally, I would have 2 versions per question in an exam, but now we have tens of versions of a question. We'll see examples of it in a minute. Also, we changed the style of questioning for certain tasks just to avoid that students can enter expressions in Wolfram Alpha and just copy the answer. And we used to have that students in this online assessments type in the final answers and hand in their paperwork. In this case, we had students scan their paperwork and upload it into the Sowieso environment as well. We used the Zoom chat as a communication channel during the exam so that students could ask questions about items or report technical problems or report that they would just go to the bathroom at home. And in some courses, we use Zoom for remote invigilation. But as I said, we don't record the students. So let's look at the concrete course, Basic Mathematics in Psychobiology, where I am the head lecturer. So normally we would have a 3-hour online exam. We do that for years already, but we reduced the time to 2 hours, not to give students less time to cheat, but more for reducing the risk of technical problems, because if the time period is shorter, you have less risk of technical problems, and it also reduces a bit the staff workload. As I said, the students solve problems with pen and paper, enter final answers in Sowieso, and after the exam, they upload the paperwork. And they have to do that within 15 minutes when they have submitted their online work. And having this communicated to the students in advance, they are very willing to do a practice test to see if they understand their scan app on their smartphone to practice beforehand. We didn't have this problem that they don't practice before. And the paperwork has always been used for scanning the answer when they have entered the correct final answer, but especially when the final answer that they typed in is wrong, then we look as a staff member to see if the student still has earned a partial credit. And you can wonder, why do you want this paperwork? Because you are already in an automated marking system with online assessment. And can't you just have students not only enter the final answer, but also enter intermediate results? Because you could, for this question about integration via the method of substitution, you could have had some extra input fields where the student says, well, this is the substitution I use. This becomes the new relation between the new variable and the old variable in terms of the differentials, the integration bounds change. You can all do this, but then you are really steering the students' solving of the problem. And we don't like that so much. We prefer to see the own wording of the students, the own writing of the students of how they solve the question. But this, of course, depends on the scale. If you have, we have 200 students, and with a team of 5 human markers, that takes us 1 day to mark the whole exam. But if you have thousands, then maybe you want to go and have intermediate results as well to be automatically marked. This marking, by the way, is quite easy if you have all this in one system. So here you see two web pages. On the left, you see question 7, the answer of one of the students, which was apparently wrong. And the teacher can look there, see this, see the worked out solution, because it are randomized questions. So you, as a marker, you want to see also what is the correct answer and what is the correct way of doing it. And you can also see in red the marking schemes, or part of it. And then on the right hand side, you see in sowieso there is the scan uploaded. So you can have next to it the scan and see that in this case the student on question 7 did quite well. Actually, the only mistake was that he or she mixed up the definition of sine and cosine, but apparently he had a good idea to get it done. So you could give some partial credit. And in a screenshot later, Natasha will show how you do that. So I also mentioned that we changed the style of questioning just to avoid that a student would enter formulas into Wolfram Alpha and get an answer or other softwares. So the straightforward questions on the left-hand side of, let's say, compute the quotient of 2 complex numbers in standard form. That is what you can enter just in Wolfram Alpha, but the question which you see on the right-hand side, which may, for us as mathematicians, be basically the same question, is for students not the same question. And I'm also a mathematics educator, and I can explain you that this is for students a different question, certainly in the aspect that they have to process the question before they can answer it in a computational way. And for example, in this, the questions that you see on the bottom row, there you have that instead of asking to solve a quadratic equation, you do it the opposite way. You say, here are the roots, create an equation, which, and in this case, create the polynomial that will have this 2 complex zeros. So changing the style is also a useful way of avoiding that fraud, or that they have an easy way of getting to an answer that you were not intending. What worried me most with the exams in the Corona times was that I moved from 2 versions per question to many more versions. And that has worry about the level of difficulty. Is, do students get similar questions? You see on the left-hand side the 2 versions of a question of last year for integration by parts, and you see only two numbers have been changed. The 2 becomes a 3, and basically it's the same question in terms of difficulty level. But now we had a more fully randomized version. You see that not only numbers will change, but also the mathematical formula will change. So students get really different questions. Now, my worry was that that would influence the exam a lot. Now, it influences, of course, but if you look at the p-value of these two questions, of this question actually, of integration by parts, you see that they did this year actually better. So you have to think about how could this be. I think one of the reasons was that they had in Corona times more time to prepare online. And maybe because of the randomization, they didn't get so often trigonometric function anymore. And probably that's scares them a bit. But if you see that we had this randomization of questions in more versions, and that we changed wordings of questions, you see that actually the mean mark didn't change much, but also the number of students passing the exam has also hardly changed from one year to another. So from these figures, we think that we still had a good quality examination with changes.
Andre, just about, and sorry, you've got a couple more minutes.
Yes, I give the floor to Natasha to present an extension of Sowieso that allows students to underpin their answers.
Thank you, Andre. In the time of Corona, we had the teachers, the lecturers from other STEM courses, not mathematics, also encountered the difficulty with their examinations, and this possibility to use this essay question that you see on this screen helped many lecturers in chemistry in particular to be able to take exams, e-assessments. So you can see on the left hand of the screen, you can see an essay question where it is possible to answer the question as a text, as a formula, or draw a drawing. And on the right hand side of the screen, you can see a closed question where a student can give an argumentation, an underpinning of the answer. And this is extremely important for all STEM courses, not only mathematics, to also be able to give more explanation, not only a short answer. So if you go to the next slide, you can see how this works. So Sowieso has a lot of possibility of different keywords where a student can answer the question, construct the formula, and on the right hand side you can see how this answer field looks like when you combine the formula, you combine the drawing and the text. So if you open the next slide, please, you can see how you draw an example, which you can see here. So on the next slide, I would like to show you how does it work for the lecturer who took this exam. So this question on the left side is a closed question. Where the lecturer asks the students to give the explanation in the note, and then under you can see how does it influence the marking. So the simply gambling chance is here underpinned with the explanation, and then they are realistic and more correct grading can take place. We had I have one more example. Yes, you can see here the answer in the essay question type, where students have on the left-hand side pasted some structures that were taken, that were drawn in ChemDraw, so that you can also have a nice answer which you can read. And on the right-hand side, you can see a simple drawing, which this here gives the possibility to give the idea. And this is very, very important in all STEM courses. Just to give you the concluding remarks, in STEM assessment, the possibility of handwriting is necessary, and actually having the Corona crisis, this we could develop this further on. And this type of question that you've seen gives the possibility and new opportunities for STEM courses. And of course the note function in it. And when you just go on. Oh. And of course, what is most important to do this is to have the parameterization and randomization, which is possible in Sowieso, but also in other such tools. And this gives the impulse that lecturers are starting to use not only summative assessment, but combination of formative and summative assessment. So the whole course design can go forward to the better practice. Of course, learning curve is always there. And as we heard already this morning, practicing is very important. And support for lecturers, of course, to help them to get across these hurdles. Thank you very much. I hope that we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And Andre, the floor is back to you.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. Thank you both. We do have time for just one question, I think. I forgot to say at the start that we should be using the Moodle site to submit questions, so anything that doesn't get answered during the live sessions, the speakers can come back and answer them. I'll just check that again now, actually, because there was just one question on the Zoom chat here. It was quite simple. Oh, there we go. So James Friday asks, with the increasing number of students in maths, the amount of time marking work becomes an issue for staff. The addition of paperwork in an exam already providing automated answers seems counterproductive. Don't you have marking time issues in Amsterdam?
Yes, of course we have issues, but our math departments are relatively small in terms of number of students. The number of incoming students every year is around 80 up to 100. So for this type of course we can do human marking because also student assistants can help with the marking, master students, PhD students. So marking is for us not so much a problem. It's more with the service education when the numbers of students grow and when you also have more ruling that you have to mark within a certain amount of days. And then the automated marking is important, but it's not my main reason for using online examinations. It's more that when you do year in, year out these online exams, you can just freely give the students access to previous exams so that they can practice, see how an exam looks like. And I'm not worried about hiding my questions in mathematics. We can always come up with new questions which are similar, but for students look as different. So for the service education, it's more important to have this automated marking in the math department itself. In the Bachelor of in Mathematics, we can cope with human marking.
Excellent, thank you. Right, I think we'll maybe stop there, but we've got one more question from someone saying, how can we learn to use Sowieso? So is that something we could set up some demo use for during the conference, Andre, do you think?
Yes, we can do that, and we can also, I didn't put the link to the Sowieso website, which they have for themselves as vendors, and there you can also see how it works. But I think I still have from the 4 years ago, accounts available to have a look at the
Right.
real thing.
We'll try and set that up after this session.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Andre and Natasha.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have Richard Gratwick from the University of Edinburgh, who is going to tell us about specification grading. So Richard.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't unmute myself. I needed permission granted. Right, let me share my screen. Right, and there we go. Thank you very much. So I'll be talking about how we used specifications grading in a course George Kinnear and I developed in 2018 up here at the University of Edinburgh. And I will also be reporting some data about the student experience we have of that gathered in conjunction with Anna Wood. So a brief sketch of what I want to cover in this talk. I will outline where the course sits in our program, what it's doing, and briefly show you how it's delivered. Then I'll talk about specifications grading in principle and how we implement it in this course, and then the outcomes in various senses of using that approach. The course then is Fundamentals of Algebra and Calculus, FAC or FAC. There are lots of interesting things to talk about in FAC, and I will not go into most of them here, so I instead direct people to this article by George that there is a reference for here. So before 2018, this is what the curriculum of the first year of the BSc Maths degree looked like at Edinburgh. We had 3 core courses, then in line with the broad Scottish education, room for 3 options. In 2018, this new course, Fundamentals of Algebra and Calculus, appeared alongside the Semester 1 core course as an option. The syllabus of the course was modelled on that of Advanced Higher Maths and A-Level Further Maths. It was designed to offer students who haven't had an opportunity to study those qualifications some exposure to that material, or students who needed a bit more practice with that kind of material, a chance to get that practice. So it was aimed at students coming in with slightly lower entry qualifications than their peers. So in terms of content, it does roughly what it says on the tin. Some algebra topics in a loose general sense, 3-dimensional vectors, polynomials, graphs of functions, complex numbers, and then lots of calculus, integration and differentiation. It was delivered almost entirely online. For our purposes, assume it was delivered online. I will briefly mention the couple of small in-person elements a little later on, but the delivery and assessment of the course entire was done through Stack. This is what a typical week looked like. We taught for 10 weeks and we had 10 topics. So we devoted each week to one topic. Here is week 4, Principles of Integration. And I should say in the Moodle page for the conference, there is a link to, in the Stack section, a demo of, I think, week 3 from FAC, if people are interested to see more of how the course was delivered. So this was what the students saw when they logged in for a week. There's a little bit of getting started motivation at the beginning. Then you see 4 areas of content proper, area under a curve, etc. These were designed to take students about 2 hours to work through each. So that's analogous to a classic 50-minute lecture with associated practice and preparation. Then there is a practice quiz and a final test at the end. So those consisted of banks of about, well, between 9 and I think 15 questions in each of those. questions very much like the students had already seen in the preceding delivery, which I'll show you in a minute, and with a 90-minute time limit on each of those 2 tests, all delivered through stack questions. I will talk more about how they combined to give the grade for the course when we come to specifications grading, but the final test for this week was what the whole week was leading up to. So the delivery of the course, when they click into, for example, section 2 on antiderivatives, look like this. It doesn't matter that we can't read it. The point is to show what kind of thing the students are engaging with. So there's a chunk of textbook-like exposition, giving definitions and theorems and things, but then that's followed in this principle that we call the textbook in the quiz, with simple questions for students to attempt to check their understanding. And as they work through the material using the menu on the left, you see at the end there's a load of mixed practice questions, which ends this roughly 2 hours of work. So these questions that the students come across, they're all delivered through stack, and they don't contribute anything towards the mark. They're entirely for the students to treat how they will. They can do them as many times as they like, getting different random versions of the questions, or indeed they can do them no times at all, and I'll come back to that. It's not just text and questions. We also spent a lot of time, George and I, making video worked examples, and also tried to incorporate some more interactive matching and sorting activities and that sort of thing. So that's a very brief overview of what the course looked like. Now I'll talk about specifications grading. In theory, the principle is to get away from spending time stressing about whether something is worth 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, certainly an issue when you're doing human marking, and instead just have a set of individual assessments that are binary marked. They either pass or fail, depending on whether they meet a certain rubric or a certain threshold mark. Some amount of resubmission is permitted for any individual assessments that are failed, and then the final outcome for the course is determined by how many of those individual assessments are passed. So, how did we implement this in FAC? If we recall, at the end of a typical week, we have this practice quiz and a final test. And as I say, the questions in these were no different to the kind of questions the students had encountered already. In fact, in a couple of cases, I think George and I did actually just clone a question from the preceding material and put it in one of these two. There's no distinction of difficulty between the two tests. We just wrote a load of questions and divided them up in between the two. Each had a time limit of 90 minutes, although it should have been possible to complete them in shorter time. And the interrelations between them and how they determine the grade is as follows. The practice quiz itself does not contribute to the mark for that week, except insofar as it needs to be unlocked, needs to be passed rather, to unlock the final test. And by pass, we mean get 80% on that test when all the questions are attempted. The students can attempt it as many times as they like, and they get full automated feedback from Stack on their attempts. Once they have passed that practice quiz, then they can attempt the final test. This is that individual assessment that needs to be passed. And 80% again is required to constitute a pass in this final test. We say there was a single attempt. If they failed, then 24 hours later, a resit test was made available, again with the same pass mark. And we refined the binary marking a little in so much as we distinguished between passing the final test at 80%, which was a mastery, or at 95% distinction. So for each of the 10 weeks of the course, we had as an outcome from the final test either a fail, a mastery, or a distinction. And then the those possible results for each of those 10 weekly tests were put together in the following way to determine what the overall grade for the course was. And then that was converted to a percentage just for number crunching purposes. So for example, if all 10 weekly units were mastered, but only 4 were given a distinction, then that gets you a grade B. To get grade A1, you need to get all 10 at level distinction. And to even just pass the course, you need to get a mastery in at least 7 of those 10 units. Okay, so in that sense, there are quite high standards going on here, because that means you needed to get at least 80%, at least 7 of the 10 weekly tests to pass this course. Okay, so how did this come out? The most worrying thing for us was what the results would look like. You know, given this way of doing things, were we going to end up failing everybody or anything like that? So let me just show you the results from the 2 years that we've run the course so far. First year, 2018-19, we had 113 students, and the mean 67, median 70, pass rate 94, a grade distribution that looked exactly like we would expect and hope from a normal human-marked exam paper. This academic year just finishing, very similar looking thing, a few more students on it this year, 181, but again, comparable mean, comparable median, and pass rate. So nothing disastrous there, most importantly. But let me talk now about a couple of possible consequences away from just the grade distribution. There is a very real risk of early failure, because if we remind ourselves that we needed to pass at least 7 of these 10 weekly units, then if a student fails the first 4, then they've failed the course already. And that's not going to lead to a good student experience. I should say I'm no longer involved with this course. George has taken it over entirely. But in the first year, I don't recall this being a problem. But we should be on guard about how to mitigate this. So 3 comments to make. Firstly is just to offer lots of support for this course. So let me comment on a couple of the in-person things that we did use. All our students on this course had access to the year 1 maths drop-in base that we run at the university in person. We also set up the Piazza online discussion forum for the course, as we do with many of our other courses up here at Edinburgh. And thirdly, we put the students in what we call autonomous learning groups, groups of about 6, and set them weekly tasks to complete. But otherwise, we left them to their own devices. We did not book space for them. We did not timetable meetings for them. We did not staff anything. We just left them to get on with it. But the point was to help build some community and give them a context in which they could discuss elements of the course with their peers. So that's the sense of the support that was offered. Secondly, I know George did keep an eye on the progress of students and intervene to pick up on people who were in danger of falling into that trap. So if they'd failed the first 2 weeks or something, a gentle email would be sent to check in on what was going on. That's one aspect of this that doesn't scale necessarily particularly easily, whereas the rest of the course does. However, there are automatic ways of doing this, of which I'm aware, things like on task, I believe. I've not at least looked into it in detail, but it is something out there that will do that kind of thing. Thirdly, it's not quite true what I said, actually. We did offer a later opportunity for resubmission after the end of teaching. During the revision period, we opened up all the final tests again for people to reattempt. So there was, in fact, another opportunity for people to pass, and therefore it wasn't, in fact, completely the end of the game if they had failed the first 4 tests. But it is something you need to make some kind of mitigation for. Now let me talk about, as I say, some of the data we have about how the students experience the course, in particular the grading system, which we've got from conducting interviews with students on the course in the past 2 years. And as I say, this is work done in conjunction also with our colleague Anna Wood, who came up with this mind map of themes relating to the grading system, which was one of the things that came up most in the interviews. This idea of the 80% pass mark. In a positive sense, it was related to a high expectation of achievement. Students accepted that this material was slightly lower level than their other mathematics university courses, and therefore we should have high standards of them, and they should be attaining highly in this course. And that had consequences for how they treated it. They really did, I remember some quotations, dig deep into the material and really push themselves to get everything right and work very hard at it. So that was a positive outcome. There were slightly less encouraging outcomes from the 80% pass mark. Inevitably, it led to a degree of frustration. Students getting 75%, 79%, and feeling they were sort of entitled to get some credit for that, but getting literally none. And this also combined with the fact that to be able to attempt the final test at all, they had to unlock it by passing the practice test. They had to keep sometimes hammering away at the practice test to pass it. And that was one of the things that contributed to a perception of the course having quite a high workload. And those two things combined to encourage behaviors which Anna described as gaming the system, whereby students work through the course, shall we say, not in the manner intended. For example, a student, when week 4, for example, was released, they didn't have to work through the material that I showed you earlier. They could, and indeed some did, choose to just bypass all the content and go straight to the practice quiz and immediately start at that. Sometimes choosing just to enter 0 if they didn't know how to answer a question, just to generate the automatic feedback, and then take from the results of that what bits of content they maybe needed to look at, and then try to pass the practice quiz again, then go straight into the final test. The game became passing the course rather than actually learning anything. I think I'm paraphrasing one of the quotations. So we need to figure out ways of mitigating these possible problems as well. And there are obvious things you can do. Make sure you have reasonably few marks per input. So, you know, if you have only 10 questions on the final test and there's only 1 input for each of those questions, then getting 3 of them wrong will get you a fail. So try to make sure that questions have, you know, multiple inputs, and essentially that not too many marks are riding on 1 chunk of input from the student. So this is an example of one of the final test questions from week 4. One thing that came up a lot, students commenting on about the difference between something that would have been human marked on paper, is that they felt they weren't getting any partial credit. If they got something wrong and were just out by a minus sign, then, well, that was that. It was wrong, and there was no more to be said. So we tried to build in some award of partial credit, and Stack can do this. This is one of the joys of it, by using the potential response trees in sensible ways. Here's a question: fully factorize this polynomial, and the answer given here is indeed a factorization of the polynomial, so some credit has been given, but it's not fully factorized, so not full credit has been given. So there are lots of opportunities for you to do that. Also, if you want to go down a line of guessing common errors, you can award credit if a student appears to have got most of it right, but made one of these common errors. For example, the classic case would be forgetting the constant of integration when computing an indefinite integral. If they've got it right except for that, you can choose to award some partial credit. And a similar principle is carrying errors forward. again, you can use the potential response trees in Stack to enable a student, once an error has been made, not to be repeatedly penalized. So here it doesn't matter what the question is, but it asks for a formula, then asks for the derivative of that formula. I've got the formula wrong, but I've differentiated it correctly, and therefore I have been given some partial credit for that. And that makes the experience fairer for the students. So in early questions, we weren't doing that so much, but even as we were developing the course, we started to try to incorporate that because we were getting feedback of frustration about the absence of that quite rapidly. So with those things said, I just want to conclude. The specifications grading system, it encourages high standards. Students rose to it and really did try to get things right. On the other hand, it did lead to some frustration, which led to some questionable behaviors working through the course, shall we say. And so to mitigate those problems, some careful question writing is required, but Stack does have the power to allow that. But most importantly, it promotes what's called mastery of the subject, right? A student who has passed this course has got 80% of the questions right on at least 7 of the 10 weekly units, which is rather different to the traditional scraping a pass of 40 by getting all the very easiest questions correct. So as suits material at this level, we can be sure that anyone who has passed this course really can do the majority of the work required in the material, which is what we want. So I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was a very interesting talk. We've got a few questions. We'll see how many we get through in a few minutes. So first of all, I have a question from John McDermott about the autonomous learning groups.
Yep.
He says, what sorts of tasks did you set these groups? And were they designed to link into the weekly topics and tests?
Yes, so each week we set them a topic based on that week. So hopefully something that was designed to promote discussion and collaboration among the groups. I'm trying to remember some of the actual tasks we used. I think in the first week on vectors, I cooked up something whereby there were 4 different vectors, but described in about 12 different ways, and the students had to collect together the 3 descriptions of the same vector and partition the different descriptions into which ones describe the same vector. Things like that. Should say these didn't work particularly well because we did ask them to complete these tasks. We did ask them to submit them, but we did not then mark them or really look at them in any detail except to see whether anything had been handed in, because again, that wasn't going to scale well. So it was just a motivation to get students to meet, and I think they quickly realized that if they didn't meet, nothing would really happen. So I know that is something that George is thinking hard about how to improve this year in particular.
Okay, we have a question from Thomas Cottrell about the grading system. He says, it seems like with this grading system, it's possible to pass with 54%. He's computing percentages by adding up tests. So you get 80% in 7 tests and 0 in the others. And it's also possible to fail with something like 88%, where you get 100% in 6 tests and slightly less than 80 in the other 4. Am I right about this, he asks, and was it deliberately designed this way? So this is really about specifications grading.
Yeah, so I haven't done the arithmetic, but that sounds plausible. Yeah, so the design is to ensure, so to the point of there being a discrepancy about the percentages there, that you pass with a lower mark than a fail. It's designed so that a student must be able to do most of the content in the course, right? That it's not enough to be really good just at differentiating and thereby pass the whole course fundamentals of algebra and calculus. You really needed to be on top of some aspects of differentiation and integration and vectors, graphs of functions and so on. So that's the big difference in the specifications grading system, but it ensures that there is a minimum achievement in a certain reasonably large amount of the material there in the course.
Okay, one more question. Is your, from James Fodey, is your brackets involved final marking scheme, the letter grades, I think that means, based on theory from Linda Nilsson's book?
I would have to defer to George on that. He actually came up with the details of the precise marking scheme. So I'll be honest, I can't answer whether it's a direct taken directly from the book.
George is here, so
yes, he is. Yes.
Yeah, so actually it's turtles all the way down. I can't say either, actually. So this came to us from our director of teaching at the time, Toby Bailey. But I believe it was certainly inspired by that. If not that book, then the set of ideas around it that he first heard about specifications grading.
Okay, great. I think there's maybe one or two more questions on the Moodle site, which we don't have time to take. So Richard, if you could have a look through those in your own time, please.
Yep, fine.
Yep. So thank you again, Richard. Thank you to Andrea and Natasha. We'll be back again tomorrow at 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Let's just cancel Richard's spotlight. And I'll show the program. So tomorrow, oopsie daisy, I clicked on the link. Tomorrow we have the first of our lightning talks. That's going to be exciting because we'll see if I can play out the recordings. So we're starting to see some more different e-assessment systems. And then in the afternoon, we've got some more experiences of online marking this year, which has been exciting for everybody. Yep, that's tomorrow. There's plenty going on the Moodle site as well. So please make sure you have a look at that. And the recordings from this morning's session are available on the talks page as well. So thank you all very much.